In this segment, I'm going to talk about some resources that you can use for pharmacogenomics. I've divided the resources up into kind of three sections. Clinically related resources, ones that are more researchy for drugs and genomics, and PharmGKB. And so each of these segments is going to be, oh, crap, sorry. I need to redo that, sorry. Oh, I can't believe I messed that up already. I've divided resources up into three different segments. One segment's for more clinically related resources, one for more bioinformatics or research type situations, and one segment for PharmGKB. In this particular segment, I'm going to talk about the clinically relevant resources. That includes the Genetic Testing Registry, ClinVar, the Adverse Event Reporting System through the FDA, and drugs at FDA and Daily Med drug labels. The Genetic Testing Registry is also called the GTR. The website, the URL is here. This is a NIH-sponsored registry. It's a repository for genetic testing information, but it's voluntary. So genetic testing companies, diagnostic test companies, can volunteer to submit their information to the registry. The information about a particular test includes the methodology of the test, what the clinical validity of it is, and what the purpose of the test is. The GTR also provides a lot of good background information about drugs and genes for the conditions that they test. It's primarily built as a repository for disease testing, but they also have some pharmacogenomics in it as well. So this is a picture of their homepage. The URL's there in yellow. You can, again, primarily it's a kind of a genetic disease testing resource, but you can enter into the main search box on the homepage a drug or a PGX gene and get some information about it. So if I entered warfarin into the search box here and just hit enter, I get a results page that includes warfarin response. It also has some other things that are sort of related, but warfarin response would be what I'd be going for if I typed warfarin in this case. So if you click that particular link, they also have synonyms like coumarin, coumadin. These are synonyms for warfarin. If I click the warfarin response link, it takes me to a page for that condition. It's considered a condition because it's built primarily for disease. So in this case, warfarin response is a condition. And there's a summary about what is relevant genetically speaking about warfarin response. And this summary is often taken from CPIC and PharmGKB, which have been covered in other segments. They also give you a list of available genetic tests at the bottom, and you can follow these links to find more information out about a particular company, the specifics of their particular test, what variants they test for, the platform they use, etc. From that main homepage, you could also type in a gene, as I mentioned. So if I type in VKRC1, you get a return page like this. This is a gene associated with warfarin response, but if I go about it through the gene, searching for the gene, I get a results page. If I click on that, it takes me to a page that's set up for the gene or protein, and you can see that warfarin response is one of the conditions listed. And again, there are available tests down below. So you can end up at the same place when you're in the GTR if you search through a drug or drug response or the genes responsible for it. However, in this particular case, to use this resource, you kind of need to know what the pharmacogenetic association is that you're looking for, or at least the drug response that you're looking for, and then it just takes you to information about what testing companies are available that you could potentially use. So that's a better resource for, say, a clinician. The next resource I'm going to talk about is called ClinVar. This is also an NIH resource. This is a repository of the genetic variation and the phenotypes. Again, primarily disease associations, but there's some PGX in there. And PharmGKB is working right now to deposit a large amount of pharmacogenomic associations. So hopefully, by the time you're watching this segment, there'll be even more pharmacogenomic relationships in ClinVar. ClinVar rates associations in its repository based on they have multiple levels of confidence for these associations, and it's dependent not only on the amount of evidence that backs up an assertion, but also on who the submitter is. So I'm going to show you the home page for ClinVar. This is a screenshot of it. Again, they have like a search box at the top. If you type in a gene such as TPMT, it takes you to a results page. Most of the current information at this time for TPMT is not PGX related, but more talking about the protein deficiency. But so like the top four results don't have anything to do with PGX. But if you would scroll down, I've highlighted here in this box at the bottom, the 8th thing on the list does talk about azathioprine response. So it does have some pharmacogenomic information. So if we want to follow that particular entry to learn more about that entry on ClinVar, we can. We follow that entry. ClinVar uses HGVS nomenclature for defining variants. This is their standard. Sometimes they also have dbSNP identifiers, also called RSIDs, but primarily they use the HGVS nomenclature to define a particular variation. If you scroll down that page, this is the top part of the page. If I scroll down, I can see the clinical assertions for PGX. They give me the actual citations, the PubMed, links to literature that backs up this assertion that there is a relationship between the drug response and this particular variant. And they also give me the submitter name. So you can follow up with the submitter if you would like to. So the next resource that I'm going to talk about, this is more drug related. Drugs at FDA is an FDA website that has official information about every FDA approved drug and biological product. It includes both prescription drugs and over-the-counter drugs. They do not have supplements or animal drugs or drugs that are sold only outside the United States. The other issue with drugs at FDA is that it doesn't always contain the actual drug label. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. And so there's another resource that you can use along with drugs at FDA called DailyMed, which I'll show you where you can typically find the drug label. So, okay, this is the homepage for drugs at FDA. They allow you to browse drugs by drug name alphabetically. You can look through all the drugs that start with M, say, or you can just go ahead and enter a drug name in the search box. So if I search on clopidogrel, for example, at drugs at FDA, I get this return page. So there are multiple entries here as a return for clopidogrel. You can see one of them, it uses the brand name Plavix instead of clopidogrel. They don't do a really great job of explaining, the synonyms for the different drugs. But if you look at the active ingredients, you can see that they all contain basically the same ingredient. So I'm just going to click, if I click the first link, the first return link that they give me on this particular page, I come to a screen like this, where this is just for this particular drug, with this active ingredient, what company makes it, and down below we have all kinds of information about the method. Is it oral, injection, what the dosage is it a 75 mg tablet, is it a 50 mg tablet? All that kind of information can be found down below. However, you can see right here in the center, it says labels are not available. So you can't find the actual, you can find a lot of information about this particular product, but you can't find the actual drug label at this time. So there's another place that you can go to called Daily Med. It's an NIH website, and the URL is in yellow. If you type clopidogrel into the Daily Med website, you again get a list of returns, but in this case they're all labels for sure. So you get many different returns, and they're all very specific to the particular product. So the things I was talking about before, is it a tablet or an injection, what's the dosage, so forth. Each one of those has their own specific FDA-approved drug label. Different manufacturers also may produce the same product. So clopidogrel is an off-patent generic. So there are different companies that produce basically exactly the same thing, and they each have their own individual drug label. There might be slightly different formations, and like I said, there's different dosages and delivery methods, if they exist, will be listed here. If I click a particular label and I want to know more about it, I get to a page. I've kind of scrolled down on this page already. I get to a return page for this label where I can view all the sections in HTML in my browser window, or I can download the PDF for the label, okay? And it gives you the black box warnings right up on top. So you can easily search the label for, if you're looking for specific pharmacokinetic parameters or indications or counterindications. Those are all easily accessible. The thing with the FDA labels is they have sort of a standard format, but not completely. And by what I mean is there are certain sections that you're allowed to have in a drug label, but any given drug label may or may not have any number of those sections. So you know that you can count on a limited list of sections being available, but any given label you won't necessarily know what those sections are. Also, what's contained inside those sections is all just text, so it makes it difficult to search programmatically. I mean, for a person reading it, it's easy. If you're, if you have the text file open on your computer, you can type it in the search box, use the find or the search on your computer to find things. But I mean, if you're writing scripts to parse these labels, it can be kind of difficult to do. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the FDA's adverse events reporting system. This is a huge database where adverse events or sometimes prescribing errors are submitted to the FDA. They can be submitted by the companies. The drug companies can submit this information. Healthcare professionals, clinicians who experience their patient experiences some kind of adverse event can report it, and then patients can report as well. This is used as a kind of safety surveillance program for drugs that are already to market. Okay, so not things that are currently in clinical trials. These are products that are already post-market, already being sold. This is the main page. It has a lot of text. Basically, from this page, you can access a lot of summary statistics for the past 10 years. The adverse events reporting system has existed in some form or another since 1969, but the current system, the way it's set up, was established in August of 2012, so it's fairly recent. There are summary files available on this website for every quarter. It's updated every quarter. You can look at summary statistics to kind of get a feel for what's going on overall. But if you want individualized data, those are files that you have to download. And the files are either in ASCII format or XML. So you have to have the ability to process those types of files. And I'm going to show you an example in a bit. But if you don't have the informatics, say, capacity to process some of these files, you can request files for a particular product, but you have to submit a formal request. Otherwise, you have to download the entire quarter file and parse through it yourself. So I'm going to go over some of the summary statistics to try to give you a feel for what kind of information is in the adverse events reporting system. So the reports submitted directly through to the FDA are in blue. That means they're submitted to the FDA instead of through the company. So as a patient or a clinician, you have a choice. You can report events directly to the FDA, or you can go back and report the events to the company, and then in batches, the company reports to the FDA. As you can imagine, this system can lead to multiple reporting. A patient could tell his doctor could tell the company tells the FDA, the clinician also tells the FDA, the patient may also tell the FDA. So there can be lots of redundancy in this database. It's quite noisy in that respect. Let's see. So there are both serious and non-serious adverse events that are reported. Expedited, in this case, you can see expedited, non-expedited. Expedited report means it contains at least one adverse event that's not on the drug label already. So sometimes the drug labels will have a section for possible side effects. But in this particular case, we're talking about adverse events not on the product label and for which the patient outcome is serious, so serious events. The non-expedited reports come from the manufacturer, and they submit them like every quarter for the first 3 years after they're approved, and then every year after that. So, so you have different kinds of reports. This is just breaking it up by reports. But you can see the reports are pretty much steadily increasing over the last few years. So the summaries ended just for quarter one in 2015. So this will, you can imagine, will probably grow and probably be more reports received for 2015 than 2014. And there's a table on the website, if you go directly to the FAIR's website, which has specific numbers for this, so you don't have to guess off of the graph. This is just to give you an idea of the number of reports that they're getting. It seems to be increasing, and if that's just because of more vigilance, it's unclear. It could be just that people are understanding that they need to report this kind of information more, or there could actually be an increase in the number of side effects, or possibly there's an increase in the number of drugs on the market and therefore an increase in the number of effects. So the manufacturer, as I said, can submit, but even the manufacturer's reports or the company's reports typically come from the healthcare provider or the patient. But reporters to the FDA directly or the manufacturer typically are healthcare providers. There's not as many, they can be patients, but most of the time they are healthcare providers that provide more reports. Sometimes the submitter isn't known, and as I mentioned before, you can have duplicate submissions. So a lot of these may be duplicate submissions between the HCP, is referring to healthcare provider, the clinician in this case. And so a lot of these are probably duplicated submissions. The FDA does contain, the FAIR's database does contain reports from other countries as well. So you can break it up by the number of reports within the United States versus the number of reports from other countries. So as long as the drug is approved by the FDA, it takes information about adverse events regardless of where that particular drug was sold. And this just is a graph that shows you, it illustrates patient outcomes for the reports since the year, in FAIRS since the year 2006, all the way again to the first quarter of 2015. These are serious outcomes and then death outcomes. Serious outcomes include death, so it's repeated there, hospitalization, life-threatening events, disabilities, congenital anomalies, and or other serious outcomes. So again, this has been increasing since 2006. So you seem to see the same pattern in all of these summary statistics, which is just basically that they're getting more and more reports every year. So I want to show you what one of the files looks like that you can download from the website. So the summary files are updated every quarter. They're released every quarter on the website. I mentioned data files are either in ASCII format or XML. This is an example of, I'm going to show you examples of ASCII files. Basically, you can download it and just import it into a program like Excel or Numbers. So it enables you to open it up and be able to, you have to delimit the columns correctly, but it's doable by humans. You don't have to have fancy programming skills. So you can give it a try by going to the homepage of the website. And at the bottom is all the quarter summaries, and it's just a zip file. Inside that file, you have multiple ASCII files. This is, they label them with odd names, but basically this stands for demographics, the year 2015, quarter 2. So this is demographic information from quarter 2 of 2015. There's a primary ID column on the left-hand side. Excuse me, I believe that's how they are identifying the reports that are submitted to them with that primary ID. You can see there's many columns. I skipped a few columns here. There's columns C through J that I've collapsed together. But I just want to show you the types of information in the demographics file include things like the age of the patient, the gender of the patient. You can see that a lot of times there's some missing information. In this case, we don't know the age. This row right here, we don't know the age or the gender of the patient. It's kind of spotty. This is self-reported information. Sometimes it's high quality, sometimes it may not be. And sometimes there's a lot of missing information. So the value in this resource is just the volume of data that's collected and trying to make assertions based on kind of analysis of the group versus looking at each individual row. But you can look at each individual report. This primary ID is going to stay constant throughout the different files that I'm going to show you. So like right here, we have ones ending in 911 and 912. And this is, again, the demographics file. We have another file that contains the drugs that these patients were on. So I have highlighted here in red all the entries for that 911 primary ID. So this particular case, this patient is on a bunch of different drugs. The drug names in this file are not standardized. They can be generic, they could be a brand name. It makes it a little bit tricky to try to group this information or aggregate it because you have to be able to map all the synonyms for the different drug names. But again, it's raw data and it's not clean. So the first dozen or more rows has the same ID. So this person has many drugs they're on. But if you look closely, you'll see that there are duplicates in duplicate drugs. Acetaminophen is listed twice, for example, at 2 different kind of dosage levels. And so does that mean that they took different dosages at different times? Or were they on, they taking acetaminophen twice a day? Or how does that work? That's not clear from these files. So you just have to know, again, that you're dealing with some messy data there. And then that 912 patient is down here. And again, this person is on like a lot of different drugs. This is a third file. This is called, I believe the REAC stands for reactions. We're looking at the adverse reactions in this particular file. So in this case, the primary ID 911, we have a lot of different events that are reported. loss of weight, abdominal pain, diarrhea. There's all different kinds of side effects that have been reported for this particular primary ID. So if you notice, we've had for that one primary ID, we have a bunch of adverse events, and we have a bunch of different drugs at different dosages that these people were taking. What's the relationship here, right? Not very clear in these kinds of instances. Are any of these drugs or the combination responsible for any or a combination of these? Maybe this person was also sick at the same time, and so some of these adverse events may not actually be drug related. It's just what was reported to affairs. So sometimes it's hard to extrapolate, especially, like I said, in a case-by-case basis, what's going on in a particular time. So again, the value is being able to look at a huge group of data and being able to manipulate the data programmatically to try to find similarities. And this is a daunting prospect, but has been done. An example is the work done by Tatanetti et al., which produced a couple of databases from the AIRS data. You can access these on PharmGKB if you want to look at this in more detail. Here's just a paper. It came out of Russ's lab, and they were able to mine through all those files with all the different adverse events and drugs and everything that people are on, and they were able to find a pattern where they could conclude that the combined treatment of SSRIs, or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and thiazides is associated with a significantly increased incidence of prolonged QT intervals. So basically saying that the combination of these two drugs together, what they were able to find is that people who were on both of those drugs seem to have an increase in long QT interval, which is a cardiac rhythm measure, and can be very problematic and dangerous in patients. And so, you know, they were able to find this association, which was previously not really documented before. So it's kind of a really interesting read. This paper will be on the reading list for this segment, and so you'll have access to that. And I recommend you reading through it and checking it out to see how mining big data like this can actually lead to some really interesting finds.